I have 6 o'clock exactly. Is this panel ready to go? That's what I'm talking about. Look, so first of all, let me extend my welcome out again to the panelists. Thank you, and thank you for all the work that you've put into this. And then let me welcome everyone, all of our booksellers and other people who have signed up for this panel. Let me welcome you. I think we're in for an enlightening and informative and a very, very timely panel considering everything that's going on around us today. America never was America to me. I'm Paul Coates, publisher and director of Black Classic Press. We're based in Baltimore, and it's really my honor to serve as a moderator for this panel. Not that the authors need a moderator, but hey, I'm here and I'm going to have the pleasure of calling each one forward for their presentation. In the interest of time, what we've decided is that each of the panelists, after being called, will introduce themselves, will speak to their work, and do a presentation on their work fitting of the book that they're dealing with. We're hoping that we're going to have time at the end of this presentation for questions and answers, and we're looking forward to generating a wonderful panel. Before we get started though, I need to take a moment and just thank the publishers who've sponsored not only this session, but sponsored the conference as a whole, making everything possible. So HarperCollins, Hachette, Simon & Schuster, Source Books, Blackstone Publishers, Scholastic, and Penguin Random House. We are eternally grateful for your support. With that, let us get started. Kim Johnson is the author of This Is My America, and she's going to start off talking about whatever you want to talk about, Kim, that can help us out and help us understand why in fact in this time we still would have a statement, and particularly Black people looking at America and saying America has never been America to me.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Thank you for an opportunity today just to talk to you. And I'm just so excited about the panelists, that are out here, because we all examine America in a lot of different ways. So I'm Kim Johnson. I'm the author of This Is My America. It's my debut novel that came out this summer on July 28th. It's a young adult read. And I posed the question when I was writing this story about how much do you really know about the American justice system, in particular thinking about how it impacts different people, and for this story that I wrote for Black people in America. So my story is about a 17-year-old girl named Tracy Beaumont who writes weekly letters to Innocence X, which is an organization that helps people when we think about the Equal Justice Initiative or the Innocence Project. It sort of gives homage to that. And she writes weekly letters to them because her father is an innocent Black man on death row. And after 7 years, time is really running out for her father. He's in his last year, and really the unthinkable happens, something that is all too familiar with the story that we see, the generational cycle that happens with the carceral state, where her brother is then suspected of killing a white girl in their town. And so this story really connects to my interests and passions and beliefs in a lot of different ways. A little bit about me. As a young person, I was an activist, a social justice leader, involved in looking at issues of police brutality back early in the 90s when I was in high school. And I'm a turned educator and mentor. So I'm an assistant vice provost at the University of Oregon, where I oversee 5 different units that are about access and equity, and the director for a multicultural academic office. And basically, I'm surrounded by young people all the time. I feel like a lot of my work is a translation of taking these very heavy topics that people haven't really tackled to think about, and talking about them in a very reachable way. And I'm also a justice seeker, not only a justice seeker, but I love mysteries and thrillers. That my first books that I loved reading were, Encyclopedia Brown and Nancy Drew. And I think I honor that still in my writing and this story. And I think it's what attracts a wider audience of readers, because it has a not only sort of very heavy topics and serious topics that are all too timely right now, but telling it in a way where it actually is a call to action that sort of sits on my social justice lenience of who I am. And when I think about my story and share how people ask me about it being so timely, I wrote it because I felt like the issue was timeless, because it is an issue that has that we have seen for too many years. And my inspiration for writing it was right around the first early iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2014 and 2015, where we were trying to say the names of Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Rekia Boyd, Tamir Rice. And for my writing this story, I had a growing frustration over the topics that people were talking about were very focused on just police brutality, and not the larger implications that the criminal justice system is actually working in the way it was intended to do since the time of slavery. And so that's the thread in writing my story that I really wanted to reach, is I wanted to look at generational trauma from the impact of the carceral state and what it means for a family and how it impacts a family. And so much of my inspiration really came from Just Mercy. When I read Brian Stevenson's work, I immediately thought about the families that are impacted, and how that can tear apart a family. And I didn't want to just focus on the hardships and the challenges in trying to tell a deeper story about how that can impact, a community, especially a Black family. Is how does it impact the larger, broader issue of we think about justice? So my story has all of those elements really intertwined. It's a fast-paced read, which I think is perfect for young adult readers, but I think readers in general who want to get an understanding of these issues. But for me, it really is about puncturing the hearts and minds of young readers and older readers to think about these issues from a human perspective, not just something that we see in media, not just something that we see as sort of this peripheral piece, but actually the lived experiences of people. And I try to do it in a way that has a lot of characters in my story that are either directly impacted or could have actually done something to help resolve an innocent case. And that's sort of the responsibility of the white community in the story that I tell about what their responsibility is to ensure that justice occurs and a part of it. So it's a perfect book for those that are, nonfiction readers, New Jim Crow, Just Mercy, who really want maybe a fiction read. It's also perfect for young adult readers who really enjoyed Monster or The Hate You Give, Dear Martin, All American Boys. And then I would say that it's also for those folks that love mysteries and thrillers. So A Good Girl's Guide to Murder meets The Hate You Give. I would say that is my story. And really excited to hear from the other panelists about how they talk about their American experience.
Caitlyn, I'm sorry. I put myself on mute. I'm very sorry. Caitlyn?
That's okay. Hi.
Great. You're up. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good, good.
Thank you for hosting this and being our sort of panel head. And I'm so excited to talk with these writers today. One of the fun things about writing a book is you imagine your book sort of in conversation with other people. And I'm so excited just to be in conversation with the writers and books that are on this panel. So my book is called Libertie. I'll show you right here. We had a beautiful cover reveal a few days ago. It comes out March 31st, 2021 from Algonquin Books. And I'll just start with a brief synopsis and then I'll sort of talk about how the book came to be. So it's based on the life of Dr. Susan Smith McKinney Stewart. She was the first Black female doctor in New York State. She was the daughter of Sylvana Smith, who was one of the founders of a free Black community in Brooklyn called Weeksville that was founded in 1838. So Dr. Smith, after the Civil War, she founded a hospital in Brooklyn. She had her own practice. She founded a bunch of other Black medical practices sort of across the US. She was a philanthropist and she had a daughter. Her daughter ended up marrying the son of the Episcopal Archbishop of Haiti and moved to Haiti and had a correspondence with her mother, writing back and forth while she was in that country, sort of saying, I love this country, but my marriage is not it. My marriage is sort of falling apart and my husband is not who I think I was married to. And so her mother was writing her these letters sort of saying to her, stick it out, and then traveled to Haiti to deliver her grandchildren, saw how terrible the marriage was, and then resolved to help her daughter escape from Haiti. And so smuggled her out of the country to New Jersey, where the daughter lived for the rest of her days. And so that was sort of the core of the story. And I, of course, have fictionalized it. I've changed some of the dates and moved it around. But that story came to me because I worked for many years as a researcher at the Weeksville Heritage Center, which is a museum dedicated to the history of that community that Dr. Susan Smith McKinney Stewart was a part of. And that was an amazing job. My first job when I moved to New York, I helped found a farmer's market. I worked with the youth program. And one of the best things about that, though, was working on their oral history project. We interviewed descendants of people who had grown up in that free Black community. And one of them was the descendant of Dr. Susan Smith McKinney Stewart. And she came to us with this story, with the actual letters that her great-great-grandmother and great-grandmother had written back and forth from Haiti. She herself was a famous soap opera actress. If you watched One Life to Live back in the day, Ellen Hawley, she was one of the first, I see that you recognize her name. She was a first Black female soap opera actress. I think she was in the first Interracial Kiss on daytime TV. She has a fantastic memoir of her family history called One Life that details all of this history of her ancestors. But I was sitting there and listening to that oral history and listening to her describe Haiti and what it meant to her family that really started me thinking about writing this novel. And as I was writing it, I was sort of writing into that moment of Reconstruction, which feels so similar to our current moment today. Reconstruction was marked by intense violence and backlash against Black communities, but also by intense strides forwards by Black communities. When you read what Black people were able to establish in the short 5 to 10 years after being enslaved, it is absolutely astounding. People, founded their own towns, founded newspapers, founded cemeteries, founded hospitals, founded mutual aid societies, just a whole bunch of life and energy and determination, self-determination coming out of that moment, at the same time that on a larger US level, intense white backlash, white violence against Black people. And so that felt very similar to our current moment. I think a lot of people have drawn that parallel between Reconstruction America and sort of what we're going through right now. And as I was researching it, what I was so struck by was, I would read these accounts from Black newspapers in the 1870s, and all the newspapers would say stuff like, racism is bad, in their language, of course, in 1870s language, but the gist of it was, racism is bad right now, but we just have to wait a generation for these older white people to pass out of power, and everything will be good for our kids. And so, that is a refrain that Americans, we have told ourselves over and over again for generations that does not seem to have happened yet. And rather than sort of write into the historical irony of like, these people should have known better, I really wanted to write into that moment of hope and possibility that people felt, really that moment that they felt that they were so close to attaining a real sense of freedom. And so while I was writing, I was thinking about sort of what freedom would have meant to a young girl like Libertie in the novel, who grows up in an all Black community in the North as a free girl towards the end of slavery, has never been enslaved, but is within the context of sort of this larger system of slavery, and what freedom would look like to her and where she would find it out in the different parts of her life. She would see it in the work of her mother, who works in the community to establish a hospital, is dedicated to finding ways to try and heal the traumatized people in her community, the people who have been traumatized by slavery. But because of the limits of both the time and just the limits of treating trauma, ultimately doesn't feel like she's able to do it. She searches for freedom when she goes off to be educated at a newly established Black college in the Midwest, and there is sort of caught into Black respectability politics and starts to wonder, can I find freedom in this idea that was really popular in the 19th century and today, that freedom is in the Black family, very traditional structure of a man and a woman, and that freedom could live there. She ends up traveling to Haiti with her new husband, looking for freedom there as well. I based part of that story on the history of Black Americans traveling to Haiti in the 19th century, looking for freedom in that free Black republic, and how important Haiti was to Black American imaginations in the 19th century, and how much free Black Americans and Black Americans in general revered that country. So I wanted to sort of write into all of those different possibilities of freedom. And then I also wanted to think about how we define freedom today. So the questions that were sort of forcing me along were, what does freedom actually mean? Can we conceive of freedom without a core of domination over other people, over the land, over groups less powerful than ourselves? Why do we so often connect the project of Black progress and Black liberation to Black women's bodies, whether they are pure enough, chaste enough, healthy enough, controlled enough to deserve or allow for freedom? And what does our liberation look like when we refuse those definitions of freedom? So those are the questions that sort of animate the project. It's a mother-daughter story above all else. It's a love story between a mother and a daughter. And it's a story about a lot of different things, about generational trauma, like Kim Johnson was speaking about. It's about this larger question of freedom and self-determination, particularly for Black women. So thanks.
Excuse me. I have to keep myself muted, right? Because I already know that I'm like being boosted up by these presentations. So I have to be my ums and stuff like that. I don't want that to come across. But thank you. That was really, really great. Okay, really, really great. Really great and inspiring. Sister Ijeoma.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
This is like that relay thing. You got the baton.
Wonderful.
So just open it up and blow it out.
So I am Joma Oluwo, and my book is called Mediocre: The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America. We don't have a copy to show because we had a house fire last week and my copy was destroyed along with a lot of other things, but it's a really cool cover. So hopefully y'all will get to see it later. So this book is really looking at 200 years of the formation of white male supremacy in America. And not just the formation of white male supremacy, but of white male identity. It's really seeking to answer the question of how we got here by looking at how we got here. And so I was really drawn to this project, honestly, because I kept finding myself talking with other Black women and women in general about why things were the way they were. And is it this particular moment? Is it who's in office? Is it the economy? What is going on? And I kept seeing patterns time and time again in how we have defined manhood, power, and race in our society over the years. And I wanted to share the story. And so I kind of went looking for it. And so really delving through history and looking at, some of our biggest movements, our biggest industries, and also in really unexpected places, I found these stories time and time again that really told about how we really want to preserve the idea as a society that white men don't need to do much more than just be white men to be powerful and successful. And what that means to everyone else in our country when that is the norm, when that's the definition of success. Not only what it means to Black women, what it means to BIPOC people, but what it means to white men themselves when you're told that all you ever have to do is exist and you will be better than women and BIPOC people in this country, people of color in this country. And really how that encourages a violent, destructive mediocrity in our society. So the book is actually it's an interesting history. Like for me, there were chapters that I was just fascinated with as I was researching and delving into, and it covers so many different topics. So we look at Buffalo Bill and the creation of cowboy mythology. We look at football, the white male supremacist origins of football, not just present day football controversies. We look at the education system. We look at women in business. It's so easy to see the patterns once you start looking of how time and time again we are given an opportunity to do something new as a country, and fear that it might upset the hierarchy of white male supremacy in this country holds us back. Not only holds us back, but creates a violent backlash that really sets us back even further than where we started at times. So it was interesting to me and terrifying sometimes to go through and realize all of the different ways in which all of our society perpetrates this. And of course, when we're talking about violence against populations of color and women in this country, we are often talking about white men. But it was also interesting to find all of the ways in which we all are expected to play our part in upholding kind of this hierarchy, this status. And so it was a long project. And for me, it was definitely a divergence from my previous book, which is So You Want to Talk About Race. And just, it's so historical, it's pulling together so many different threads. And so there were so many times where I would shake my head and I'm like, I can't believe it seemed almost ridiculous what we were doing to uphold these harmful norms. But the end result, I think, really shows the choices that we're making as a society. And that's really what I want people to look at. My goal is not only that people will learn more about the real history of this country than they're learning in schools and in films and in books, but that they will see reflections of themselves, their family, and their values in some of the harm that's been done. I hope that people will look at this and say, we need to make better choices. But also, I really hope that people who have been greatly harmed by these systems, especially women and people of color, will see that they are not crazy. We'll see that they are not unlucky. We'll see that they alone haven't been singled out, that they are part of the system that has been working as designed for hundreds of years. And that we must collectively work to change our systems and also to change our expectations as a society. So the book kind of starts, I would say it starts in the mid 1800s with the creation of the, American cowboy. And then it moves into some of the first white male feminists. And then we talk about politics and we talk about women in business. We talk about the Great Depression and the ways in which many women and people of color, especially Black people and Hispanic people, were really not only thrown under the bus, but in some cases had their whole lives destroyed by the scapegoating of financial hardship. We move on and talk about our education system. We talk about football, not only the origins of football, but of course the current controversies we're in today. And we cover all of these topics in order to show, once again, not just what was done, but where choices were made. I want people to understand that the fear of trying something new and better is what's holding us back from greatness. That it is important that we let go to such superficial ideas of superiority, that we let go to the fear that someone that we've always been told is less than us might do as well as us one day or even better. Because when we allow everyone to thrive, we all thrive. Where we take those who've been held back and pull them along with us and say, now you can accomplish what you should, then we all accomplish more. And this is not just sentiment. This is something that my book shows. Studies have shown that areas that encourage active diversity and openness and creativity are economic powerhouses for our country. And I want that for us. But also I want us to be freed from the psychological torture of thinking that the measure of your worth is only defined by how much better you are doing than somebody else. And I want that for everyone, including white men. And the final chapter of the book really talks about the personal toll that this takes on white men. When you never have any intrinsic sense of self-value, when it is always looking outward, always compared to someone else, that is psychologically damaging in a way that we are seeing in white male depression and suicide rates. And so I'm just hoping that this book at times will frustrate people. It's a little funny, I've been told. I do have a bit of a sense of humor, but I hope it will educate people and really underscore the sense of urgency around deciding something new. I think that right now, when we look at 2020, what we're seeing is kind of one of the final forms of white male mediocrity in our society, in places that when I started writing this book, I did not think it was going to take us. But when you read the book and you look at where we are, it actually doesn't seem like much of a surprise. You're like, oh yes, okay, this is what's next. And I don't want to find out how much further down this path we can go before we fall off the edge altogether. I would rather we stop and do something new. And I think there are enough people in this country and in this world who agree and just aren't quite sure where to start, aren't quite sure what the problem looks like. And I'm hoping that this book will be one of many tools out there to help people make different choices. So that is my book. It is out December 1st with Seal Press, and I am excited to be sharing it with the world.
Wow. Thank you, Joma. Thank you. You know, I was thinking when you were talking, I'm not going to ask you questions about the book because, look, but I was thinking when you were talking, you said, I've been told I have a sense of humor. You know, that's really funny. We'll have to talk about that.
We'll find out if it's true or not.
Margaret, you're bringing this home.
Yes.
So we will let you do that, and welcome and bring all this together. We can get on. We're doing good on our time. I think we just need to see some questions. If they don't come, I got questions for y'all. So
Okay.
This is really good. I am enjoying this. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm having a great time. So Margaret, please help us and introduce yourself, please, and tell us what you brought to share with us.
Sure. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I have to say now there are 3 more books I have to read.
I know.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Margaret Kimberley, and thanks for inviting me to talk about my book, Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. And here it is. I'll put it up again with a lovely blurb from Cornel West, and I'm very grateful to him for doing that. Prejudential presents 45 essays, one for each presidency, that analyze the history of Black people as they attempt to navigate this political system, which is inherently hostile to their existence, as this is a settler colonial state. Chattel slavery was defeated, only to be followed by nearly 100 years of Jim Crow segregation, and now 50 years of varying degrees of reaction. The presidency is a long history of betrayals, punctuated by progress, but that only happens when it's brought about by the action of the people themselves. This project began, it's the result of a Black Agenda Report column. I'm co-founder and editor and senior columnist at blackagendareport.com. And back in 2014, I wrote a column about Theodore Roosevelt. I wrote it after watching a PBS documentary about the Roosevelt family. And I think by definition, those sorts of films are paeans to the subject matter. But I was struck by the fact that, as usual, Roosevelt's very open bigotry was omitted, and I felt moved to write about his white supremacist beliefs, the war against the Philippines, his court-martial of Black soldiers in Brownsville, Texas, which was a huge injustice. And a friend and supporter of Black Agenda Report urged me to write about all the presidents. And then I began this long journey of getting a book published. Prejudential obviously appeals to anyone interested in American history in general, in Black studies, and presidential history in particular. The information I found is readily available to anyone who looks for it, although that's easier said than done. I always say that I owe a great debt of gratitude to the New York Public Library System, the Bain Research Branch, the Schwartzman Library, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, also a New York Public Library Research Center, and the Library of Congress in Washington. I spent many days in all of those places. I did a lot of research online, but ultimately you have to sit in those stacks, which is hard work, but very rewarding. But the area of interest, the fact that I wanted to write about Black people and the presidents, meant that I had to take special care to decipher what others had written before me. Most historians are, I think, are system affirming people and don't want to give great attention to any area of interest, mine or others, that detracts from the people they admire or from the country as a whole. So biographers will say that a particular president who was a slaveholder, 10 of the first 12 presidents were slaveholders, by the way. They'll say they treated them, their enslaved property well, and not talk about slavery itself, and ignore, for example, the fact that George Washington, when the capital was in Philadelphia, had a problem. Philadelphia had passed a law that any enslaved person in the state for 6 months had a right to be free. And so Washington got around that by rotating his human property and kept keeping no one in Philadelphia long enough to declare their freedom. And he and his wife, Martha, going to great lengths to try to recapture unsuccessfully, good news, one young woman who managed to escape. So the information is there, but you have to be a discerning writer to build upon it and reveal what others may not want to. But fortunately, the subject had been tackled by authors before me. It's a companion to classics such as George Sinclair's The Racial Attitudes of American President, Melvin Steinfeld's Our Racist President, Kenneth O'Reilly's Nixon's Piano, and the most recent book on the subject, Clarence Lusane's The Black History of the White House. Also, anyone interested in James Lowen's books, such as Lies My Teacher Taught Me, will be interested in Prejudential. There are a couple of things I wanted to point out about not just about my book, but the tie with present day history. You know, American history, and I just touched on it, is full of the ideology of American exceptionalism. Last week, I think it was last week, President Trump gave a speech advocating for patriotic education, which is in fact a return to the norm. So it seemed kind of funny to me, but he's advocating for something we already have. It was hard work, but I gave some attention to each and every president, including the more obscure office holders like Millard Fillmore, who is made fun of as being this non-entity, but he signed the Fugitive Slave Law in 1851, and James Buchanan, who is generally just known as the last guy before Lincoln, but he actively colluded with the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott case. And so here we are in an election year. I've written a book about presidents, and we've seen this history after the Civil War, when Black men in northern states had the right to vote. And at that time, it was the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, that most Black people belonged to. So you see this litany of election after election. People like Frederick Douglass would advocate for voting for the Republicans. He famously said, the Republicans are the ship and all else is the sea. Now it's been reversed. It's the Democratic Party that's seen in that way. But there's a dilemma for Black voters whose choices are narrowed by their need to protect the party they see as being more supportive, or even just, what are people saying about this election? It's just harm reduction. If you're not, crazy about Joe Biden, it's just harm reduction. Think of it that way. But that's not new for Black people. I touched on Teddy Roosevelt, and one of the more disgraceful things he did, he court-martialed these Black soldiers in Brownsville, Texas, who were accused of committing a murder. They had not. They took up arms literally to defend themselves from a mob. And he waited until after an election to get Black people's votes, and then court-martialed all of them. So that is the situation we find ourselves in. And then, of course, what's the response from the Black community is to fall out with the Republican Party, to eventually some leaders endorse Woodrow Wilson, who ended up being one of the worst presidents for Black people, an ardent segregationist, the man who screened the birth of a nation at the White House. So this is where we find ourselves now in 2020. So if Trump doesn't win, I have to write a new chapter, I guess. But anyway, I think I've brought us up to the present day as well. So anyone interested in modern presidential history, I think will also enjoy reading Prejudential. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you guys. I want to tell you guys how good you are, okay? So we've got just about 20, 24 minutes that we can deal with questions. I just want to make a statement. And this is, I already told you guys how excited I am, and y'all think maybe I'm jiving with that, but no, I'm really, really serious. And this is whether anybody is in the room, whether no one is in the room, I'm really saying this to you guys. I made the allusion to a relay earlier, and that's how I see you guys. I see you taking the whole notion of Black books. This is another leg. This is another lap, not the final one of the race at all. But like, I look at Black books as being done, during our enslavement, after our enslavement, during the civil rights and all of that, and up to this point, and largely for only Black audiences wanted a part of those books. You guys are at a phase where you get to, not because you intended to do it, because all of your books were started before, but you're at a phase now where literally the world has an opportunity to access our experience. And in that sense, what you're writing and the truth you're telling reveals that to the world. It reveals it to audiences well beyond our Black bookstores. So it's exciting to be a part of this and to ask you questions like I'm getting ready to ask, because I don't see any other questions in the box. So Sister Ijeoma, I'm going to start with you, okay? And I'm not going to drag these questions out, but let me back up. Let me pause for one moment. Are there burning questions you want to ask of each other? Because that really was my intent. I got carried away there, So let me back up. Are there questions that you want to ask of each other first? This is y'all's show. I forgot.
I just want to say bravo to Margaret for the title Prejudential. That is the best title. I mean, those are going to fly off the shelves. That is an amazing title. So that's the only thing that I have to say. I've got a ton that I want to geek out on everyone, but I did want to add that was my burning thing I had to say.
Oh, thank you. It was, I have to thank the publisher actually at Steerforth Press. They helped me out with, because the subtitle Black American, the Presidents was my working title, but being people who had published, that's what they do. They knew we needed something punchier. So I have to give credit to them. But it was an interesting thing, knowing how to write, but not knowing anything about getting the book published. So that was just one of my lessons. Thank you.
Good. Anyone else? Y'all know I'm burning, right? So look, Ijeoma, help me with something, please. Your which I haven't, I'm just, you can deal with this, because I noticed the way your how you got into writing the book. You laid that out so perfectly. Is there a concern when you focus on white male, white male superiority? Is there a concern with letting white women off? And I mean in this sense, is there a concern with the focus of our history, looking at our history as looking at white men as being the perpetrators? And I ask that because, as you well know, there's a lot of research being done and a lot of writing being done now on the role of white women, particularly in our enslavement. So I'm just curious how you balance that and how you approach that and how you dealt with it.
I love that question, honestly, because I think that it is something that I, as a writer and as a Black woman, tried to really keep front of mind in writing this book. One thing that I like to imagine, honestly, is kind of what it will be like as a white woman to pick this book thinking, oh, it's going to be great. I'm going to be woke and I'm going to read all about how awful white men are and I'm going to feel connected, and then seeing reflections of themselves, their sons, their husbands, and things that they're really invested in. So this book is focused on white men, but it's focused more on the structure of power around white men. And so in that, you're going to see also where white women oftentimes really collude with white male power, because it is their proximity to power itself. And in a society that really does, for women and for BIPOC people, for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color across the country, the closest you can get to power is the closest you can cozy up to white men or emulate white men in places. You're going to find that those higher on that, structure are going to take part in, many really harmful decisions. And so my hope is what we will look at white male power less as individual white men doing bad things. And that's really what I want to move us away from, because I think that when we do that, not only do we exceptionalize white men in a way that, is really uncalled for, but we remove responsibility from the system and our roles in the system. And I want us to look at it more as an identity that we uphold, and that white women honestly hold a large portion, do a large portion of that work around. So within the book, there are definite areas where you can absolutely see the active participation of white women, even in areas where they're being harmed. So even in chapters looking at like white women in business, or like, you will see other white women actively participating in pushing white women out of business or punishing them for how they act in business. And I think that it's really important that we recognize that, because I want us to be looking at our systems and looking at our ideals, and how, while the ideal may look white male, it's something that we all kind of play this part on, some of us much more than others.
Got it. Thank you. Look, so we've got a couple of questions generated, and let me try to read this. This one goes out to Kim. Oh, well, first of all, some of the comments that we're getting, folks have enjoyed the panel. They love the panel and wish that they were here to engage you, to tell you how incredible these presentations have been. Okay. So Kim, this one is, I loved This Is My America. How did you decide to meld so many genres into one amazing, powerful book?
I never thought of myself as a writer. I started writing 9 years ago. I didn't believe that I could write. It was not an identity that I held, but I always was a storyteller. And so I think, having self-taught myself how to write, I didn't have limits. I wasn't looking at previously determined boundaries, because I wanted to create my own thing. I think that was one of the reasons why I really sort of melded so many different genres together. And I think I feel like it's so much of me. So I love reading nonfiction. I love studying, African American history, sociology, psychosocial identity, all of those components. I love working with young people. Activism is core at me. And I think that's really where my story came from, in wanting to have all these pieces. And I just wanted to add to the previous conversation of that. I agree so much. It's so important that we identify white male superiority as it is a system. And I write about that in my work, is that we're all, we're upholding it. And even in my story, I have characters that are upholding it, not really realizing that they're a part of upholding it. And it's at the core fabric, because it's what we see as the American dream. We see that as, in order to be successful, you need to do these things. And it's about unpacking that. And I just love the earlier comment about trying to stop doing reform. So I can't wait to read Mediocre. It's not about reform. Like, we have to imagine new things, because our history, it repeats itself so much. So.
So guys, look, we're at 6:45. We were supposed to end at 45. I understand we've got less than 5 minutes or 5 minutes. Is there, and we still have one question in the queue, but I really would prefer to end this with you guys if there's something you want to close out on, something you want to say that, so that we can have completion in this. My say on it is, I thank you guys. I thank you very, very much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation and generating. I too wish we were doing this, because I could go on, but thank you. And you have incredible books, all 4 of them. Incredible books. So is there something anybody wants to say to close out?
I would like to say, just remember our history. This election is being called the most important election of our lifetime. Well, they all seem to be now. I don't know about that, but I think if we, when we know our history, we can discern more easily what's going on now. There was fascism in America before. Jim Crow was fascism. The Red Summer of 1919, when black mobs killed black people all over the country. The 20s, the Klan. Harry Truman was a Klansman as a young man, although he tried to lie about it. So there's nothing new under the sun, as the Bible says. Maybe I'll end with that quote. So, but I think it's, I guess I'm talking about everybody's book, even though I'm mentioning presidency and elections, but knowing our history is key to understanding what's going on now.
It is.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate what Kim said a little bit earlier. Knowing our history also allows us to imagine different ways of being. So, like, the history of Black people in this country is that our communities have continuously come up with ingenious, fantastical, wonderful ways to respond to all of the pressures around us and the intense structural racism that we face. All of those things that we have faced, people in the past have imagined whole ways of responding to it. And once you study the history, you can find those different forms, and it can help to inform what we can imagine to be better. We don't have to be wed to what the larger culture tells us has always been the way. Really, it's imperative of us to have a bigger imagination than that. And we shouldn't be afraid to have that bigger imagination.
Got it. Okay, well, look, with that, we're going to close. We want to, in closing, again, we want to thank our sponsors, because, of course, again, they help make all of this possible. HarperCollins, Hachette, Simon & Schuster, Sourcebooks, Blackstone Publishing, Scholastic, and Penguin Random House. And again, I just want to thank you guys and wish you the very, very best in times of pandemic with the wonderful books that you've written. And I look forward to engaging you each at some point so we can continue this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.
Thanks, you too.
You too.